Okay, good morning, everyone. You're all very welcome to this Foresight webinar. I'm just going to give delegates just another moment to join. My clock's saying just after 10, so we're just about ready to make a start. I'll just give delegates another moment to join there. Okay, good morning, everyone. And once again, you're all very welcome to today's Foresight webinar, which is looking at CCUS investment and project progress. My name's Tiernan. I'm a conference producer here at Foresight Events. I'll be moderating today's session. It's really great to see so many of you on today. We've had a good number of bookings for this one, so I think that's a good sign and a good time to kind of take stock of where we are in terms of development and funding for CCUS. I think we're here at a bit of a pivotal moment. I think it's a sector that's really no longer confined to sort of pilot projects and feasibility studies, but it's certainly stepping, I think, cautiously but very decisively into project delivery now. And over the past few months, we've seen a major shift, I think, in tone and tempo from government and industry alike. We've had recently the Chancellor's commitment of 9 billion in public capital to track two cluster projects. We've just had recently the National Wealth Fund's first equity investment in carbon capture and storage in the Peak District, and we've got Catherine on today, who I'm sure will elaborate a bit more on that as well, and where we are in terms of that development. And I think there's a broader kind of strategic conversation taking shape around CCUS, not just as an emissions abatement tool, but also as a real critical pillar of UK industrial policy as well. Further, the CCC have commented that CCS is a necessity and not just an option for net zero. And similarly as well, NESO's Future Energy Scenarios report as well mentioned how critical CCS is. So I think the policy markers are certainly there, and I think it's a really good time now to take stock of where we are and what's next as well. We've got, I think, a few questions there remain around: are we moving fast enough? Are we building for long-term resilience? And is this investment ecosystem truly scalable? I think it is, and certainly I think our speakers will say so. But I think there's still a few questions to answer there, so I think it's a good time to get into it. We're joined by a panel of speakers who are bringing perspectives from across finance, industry, infrastructure, and technology as well. I'll introduce them all now before we start. So first, we're going to hear from Mark Sommerfeld from the Carbon Capture and Storage Association. Next, we'll hear from Catherine Wainwright, who's Commercial and Investment Director at the Peak Cluster. And then finally, we'll hear from Jason Frost, who's Commercial Development Manager at SLB Capturi. Great to have you all here, and thanks very much for joining, guys. We'll, of course, be hearing your questions as well, so please do feel free to pop them into the Q&A button that you see at the top of the screen there. We're going to bank them all for the end, so we'll hear from each speaker about 10 minutes each, max of opening remarks before we move on to questions from the floor. If you do want to ask a verbal question as well, please feel free. That is an option. If you can see that raise hand icon at the top of your screen as well, feel free to give that a click and we'll bring you in to ask a question verbally as well. If you do that, please just, if you could state your name and organization for the transcript, that'd be great. Final thing from me as well, this session is being recorded and a recording will be sent to you all, as well as a transcript copy post-event as well. So do look out for that too. So with all that out of the way, let's get into it then. Very happy to introduce Mark Sommerfeld from the CCSA to kick us off. Mark, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Hopefully you can see my slides. So I just share them on the screen. Can you see those okay?
All clear, Mark. Go ahead.
Perfect, wonderful. I'll get underway then. So thank you very much for having me this morning. I think my role here is really just to provide a bit of an overview of where the market is at, especially post the spending review. And then Catherine and Jason can provide more detail in terms of real industry projects that are going on, a very exciting time as well. Quick introduction to the CCSA. So we're the Carbon Capture Storage Association. We're a pan-European trade body. So we have an office in London and an office in Brussels. And I'm UK director, so I look after our UK office and our involvement in talking to government in order to increase the support and regulatory environment in order to build the carbon capture and storage sector in the UK. We do that in a number of ways. So we advocate for policy developments in the UK. We raise awareness around CCS, we drive progress on commercial scale projects, and we also take a technology neutral approach to doing that. So we have members involved across the full supply chain of CCS, and we are keen to see all developments of CCS delivered within the UK. To further reiterate that point, this is a brief overview of the kind of members that we have as part of the CCSA. So we have your storage providers who are building the storage projects and getting underway with those. We have the power and industrial sector who are looking to implement the carbon capture and usage technologies. We have the developers themselves developing different kinds of technology and seeing the technology installed. We have the engineers and equipment providers who are, obviously advising on how these projects get delivered. We have the transport and distribution members who are looking at how to develop those pipelines, those non-pipeline transport options, and see that carbon distributed to storage. And then increasingly and really welcomingly, we're also increasing the number of members that are within the kind of service provision to the sector. So our financial consulting, legal and other members who are getting involved in this sector, and a very positive sign of that being this is a sector that is growing and developing as more service providers come into it as well. I'd say, just to start off, to give a bit of contextual history to the CCUS sector, we're as the introduction said, we're at an interesting moment, but this is probably the third time UK governments have tried to get CCUS off the ground and into development. So this is the third iteration, as it were. This iteration really started back in 2017, probably with the clean growth strategy. This is now several governments ago, but that was the first time we got a new commitment to CCUS and a recognition of its importance in both decarbonising the UK, but also as a key industrial driver within the UK. It was then incorporated into Boris Johnson's 10-point plan for the Green Industrial Revolution in order to take that forward. And then we had a number of budgets and spending commitments in order to get things moving and going. That led in 2023 to our carbon capture usage and storage vision document. So this was produced by the government in December 2023, and it set out their initial ambitions for establishing the sector. Three general phases to how that vision is set out. One, the first phase, a market creation phase, using government support in order to establish the market and create operational projects by 2030. I'll go into the status of those projects later on, but the idea is we're pushing forward with government support in order to get initial projects developed, and that is across the supply chain. So that is including working on clusters in order to create center on emitters, get the emitter carbon capture technology installed, connect that to transport and storage units, and then get that into storage assets around the country as well. So get that market moving, the full value chain of it operational. They then want to look at a market transition phase, creating a competitive market from 2030 onwards, and really moving into a self-sustaining market by the 2050s. So three distinct phases there, recognizing need for early government support, moving into self-sustaining market, and a future vision for a full carbon capture usage and storage market within the UK. So what has the latest government done in order to see that delivered? Well, it's been a fairly positive development in terms of since the general election, and this wasn't obviously July 2024, major general election, major change of government. And to be honest, we weren't sure about how the Labour government would be responding to carbon capture and storage. We had a number of discussions with them before the election. We were assured that they were supportive of the sector, but it yet to be seen at that point how they were going to support the sector and drive it forward. Now, the good news is we've had, as people will be aware, a number of very positive announcements since then coming into power, and a reiteration of their commitment in order to drive this sector forward. So back in July 2024, we had the first iterations of that with the Clean Power mission being set out by 2030 and CCUS being mentioned within that. But then more importantly, by the 4th of October 24, we had this £21.7 billion worth of funding committed to the first CCUS projects. So that was for what was then called Track 1, so the HyNet and East Coast cluster, and that 21.7 billion over 25 years being earmarked for the first 5 projects, and pushing the sector forward. We've then had the autumn budget, was a precursor to the spending review, but prior to that, with that 21.7 billion being committed, we've had a number of final investment decisions announced, which is incredibly positive. So 10th of December last year, we had Net Zero Teesside Power and Northern Endurance Partnership reach final investment decisions with government. And then they were joined in March this year by the ENI and the Liverpool Bay Transport and Storage system, also reaching financial close around the HyNet cluster. So we've now got 2 projects moving into proper delivery phases and build out phases, which is an incredibly positive position to be in. Then we had the spending review in June last month, where 9.4 billion was confirmed as part of this spending review. This spending review going out to 2030 in order to fill the existing stores and further develop the Viking and Acorn clusters. Go into that a little bit more detail. So this 9.4 billion capital funding allocated over the spending review period. That's important to recognise that a spending review is looking at the current spending period of this government, not looking beyond that. So they have stated that they want to build out the East Coast cluster and HyNet cluster. What does that mean? Well, you will know that the final investment decisions around those clusters have focused on the transport and storage networks of them. They have not yet committed to the emitters that will be feeding into those clusters. So in order to make strong value for money there, they need to make sure that they are building and connecting the carbon capture storage emitters and seeing those delivered. We know there's lots of discussions underway within government. There's a couple of anchor projects that are being discussed there, and we're currently awaiting publication of the project negotiation list, which sits around some of those emitters for the HyNet cluster, which was previously known as Track 1 expansion. So getting those emitters connected and filling the stores as they have now termed it. They've also committed development funding for Acorn and Viking, so Viking on the East Coast cluster and Acorn around the Scottish cluster, in order to see those further developed and delivered, with a statement of wanting a final investment decision on them this Parliament, subject to readiness and affordability. We're still waiting for clarification on what the next steps are there, but we know there are bilateral discussions going on with both Viking and Acorn in order to see those projects taken forward. Importantly, as part of that announcement in the spending review, there was a real shift from talking around this cluster sequencing process, which was the Track 1, Track 2, Track 1 expansion, which you may have heard around previously, to much more talking around now a portfolio approach. So they want to be developing all of these clusters around the country. They're no longer talking about necessarily the order in which they will happen. They have committed to what were the Track 1, the HyNet and the East Coast cluster. They've committed development funding to Acorn and Viking, but they're now moving on to going back to that vision statement about how do we start to develop the wider market. Also a statement of that 9.4 billion, government are yet to really set out how that relates to the 21.7 billion officially, but we understand it to be all part of the 21.7 billion. So it's not additional money on that. There may be a little bit of additional money within there, but this is around this current spending review, this capital expenditure within this time period, and part of that longer term 21.7 billion over the next 25 years as well. So what's the status of current CCUS projects? So we've gone through, we've got 2 final investment decisions, incredibly positive in order to see those. We're looking at filling the capacity with that 9.4 billion of HyNet and East Coast Cluster. But as I said, we're awaiting publication of the project negotiation list in order to see that done. We've got the Viking and Acorn CCS projects going forward with development funding, but we need to understand what the next steps are there. Outside of the spending review, we've also had Peak Cluster, and it's fantastic to have Catherine online today in order to talk through their developments there. So I will leave that to her. But really positive to see the National Wealth Fund also investing 28.6 million in equity there, focused on the pipeline there from the Peak Cluster, which is a group of lime and cement producers, going towards the Morecambe Bay net zero storage asset. They're really great to see that funding coming forward from the National Wealth Fund, although obviously they are outside of what was originally the track 1 and track 2, and there now needs to be a route to market for them to be delivered as well, which I'm sure Catherine can speak about. And then there's many other clusters around the country, as mentioned on the right on that map. And we're now in the process of talking with government to set out what is the future allocation process that we can start to get those clusters delivered as well. So how do we start to move forward with them? There's a number of consultations coming out later this year looking at those future networks, and in particular also expecting a consultation later this summer on non-pipeline transport. So how do we start to connect those clusters that aren't near the initial pipelines and see them delivered? Importantly for us, we also want to be talking about how do we deliver the wider market. So this is things, the additional revenue streams that can start to move towards a self-sustaining market. These are things like cross-border storage, so utilizing our huge assets that we have in the Southern Sea in order to develop our storage capacity there, and that includes bringing in emissions from Europe to be stored in UK waters. Also developing our greenhouse gas removals market, so creating demand for those negative emissions that come from biogenic CO2 capturing, so be that biomass or energy from waste or biomethane or any other form of biogenic capture. Talks around the UK ETS, so you'll be aware that UK and EU have recently committed to entering into discussions to linking the ETS systems and how that will evolve and create a more standard price across Europe for the ETS and therefore drive emissions reductions within industry and open that cross-border CO2 market for cross-border storage. And then finally, also developing a low carbon products market. So this is things like low carbon cement, low carbon chemicals, low carbon glass, all of which can utilize CCUS in order to protect those UK foundational industries, protecting jobs and protecting assets here in the UK. But we need to create demand for those low carbon products and ensure that the UK supply chains are present in order to do that. Quick word also on a number of other government publications that came out just after the spending review, which were the industrial strategy, which as part of it had the clean industries sector plan and the infrastructure strategy. And the good news there was that CCUS was very much foundational to all of those documents, including seeing CCUS, including GGRs, greenhouse gas removals, identified as one of 6 frontier clean energy industries. So it really being recognized that CCUS can be a real significant driver for growth in the UK and government wanting to get behind it, including within the infrastructure strategy, wanting to build it out and see this as a successful sector moving forward. What are the current support mechanisms there for seeing CCUS delivered? So I talked about the funding mechanisms, but government have also been developing what's been known as these business models. So read as government contracts, support mechanisms, for delivering different parts of the value chain of CCUS. A number of these are already developed and are fairly advanced, while a number of others are, in early phases or nearing completion. So we've had development of the RAB model, which is a regulated asset-based model for the transport and storage networks, which that contract has now been developed. We've also got the dispatchable power agreement for large-scale power producers to be implementing CCUS as well, and the industrial carbon capture, things like cement and so forth. That contract is now fairly well advanced and developed. We've also had development of the CCS network code, which are actually now in the phase of seeing evolved as well, and talking with government what's the next stage for that. Outside of that, we've also got the industrial carbon capture energy from waste business model, which is a government contract that has been fairly well evolved now, but there's further changes still being discussed there in order to allocate risk appropriately within that, a low carbon hydrogen production model as well as part of that. Still in discussions, but well advanced now, are also a business model around engineered greenhouse gas removals, the power bioenergy carbon capture and storage business model as well, focusing at large scale biomass assets there. A RAB model for hydrogen transport, hydrogen storage, and hydrogen to power also being consulted on. Later this summer, we're also expecting that consultation on non-pipeline transport. And we're also aware that government are increasingly talking about carbon capture and usage as well going forward. So expecting market developments and business model support to be looking at all of these areas of the CCUS value chain. Finally, then, just to talk about a little bit about wider developments, lots of other things that are happening within the market that are going to help deliver CCUS. So the UK-EU ETS linkage discussions, as I've already mentioned, between the EU and UK. We are getting underway, both within our Brussels office and UK office, to talk to the relevant sides of that discussion in order to make sure that, one, things like greenhouse gas removals, carbon direct removals are recognised within those discussions, but also opening up the possibility of cross-border CO2 storage within that. We've also got the greenhouse gas removal review that's been underway for the last few months and should be reporting sometime in October. And we've also had confirmation of greenhouse gas removals being included within the UK ETS. Increasing discussion around low carbon products and standards. There's a current low carbon products consultation that is underway in order to start to develop that market. We've had some indications around the view of electricity markets, but now a commitment to national pricing reform, which will have further implications for our power CCS members and how that develops. Lots of discussion with government and in the news around industrial energy pricing, discounting. So how do we bring down the price of industrial energy, and current consultations going on there. We've got the carbon border adjustment mechanism due to come in 2027, and also an interesting market evolving around sustainable aviation fuels, SAF, and the mandate having come in at the beginning of this year, and how that market will start to evolve. So very quick run through there of everything that's going on within the CCUS market, but hopefully that gives a bit of a context and status update for where the sector is based. Thank you.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. Very, very comprehensive, and lots covered there in such a short amount of time. So thank you very much for that. Catherine, we'll move swiftly on to yourself now. And as I know we're just a bit behind, feel free to go ahead when you're ready. I think you've got some slides as well, do you? Just on mute there, Catherine.
Sorry, thank you, Mark. And yeah, it's great to hear the history and a lot of the background of what's happened over quite a number of years. So I'm just putting on my slides. Hi, so yeah, hopefully you can see that. Thumbs up. Great. Okay. Yeah, good morning. So I'm Catherine Wainwright from Progressive Energy. I'm Commercial and Investment Director of Peak Cluster. Progressive Energy is a developer of large-scale decarbonisation projects. It was actually one of the early developers of HyNet background. My background is energy trading, investment in energy transition projects, and more recently, I've spent a lot of time working on government business models, and in particular, actually the hydrogen government business model in the context of HyNet and the ETH hydrogen project. So some background to Peak Cluster. So Peak District has a number of cement and lime facilities in it because of its a unique geology. And together they produce 40% of the UK's lime and cement, employ a lot of people and emit over 3 million tonnes a year of CO2, much of that from the process emissions, which are obviously hard to abate. You can't abate them in some of the easier ways like electrification or changing fuels. And they account for a big chunk of the CO2 emissions in two counties, Derbyshire and Staffordshire. So that concentration of emissions means there's an opportunity for a really cost-effective decarbonisation project. So that's Peak Cluster. The Peak District and the lime and cement in the Peak District. The other piece of the jigsaw is the Store and Morecambe Net Zero, so Spirit Energy's MNZ project, which has an impressive 1 gigaton of storage capacity longer term. So that's permanent CO2 storage by converting depleted gas fields. They've been operating those for over 50 years, so there's lots of experience of the geology and operations around those fields, which makes them really well suited to converting to CO2 stores. It's the South and North Morecambe Bay fields. And the aim is to bring those to 25 million tonnes of storage a year by the end of the next decade. That project is pretty well advanced. The NSTA awarded it a licence in May 2023. There's been work done on early risk assessment, site characterisation and seismics. So that's the Spirit Energy side of this interesting project. So together, Peak Cluster, which is the emitters in the Peak area, this onshore pipeline taking that CO2 to a handover point with Morecambe Net Zero and Spirit and the substantial store there. Together, it creates a really attractive full chain CCS project. And the reason why that's important is that I think we've all recognised, those working on HyNet and East Coast, how difficult but important it is to make sure that each part of the value chain is working in step. We can't have the risk of developing a store that has no CO2 or CCS projects that have no store, and government can't support projects where that is a major risk. So working in tandem with Spirit is a key part of what we're trying to do with Peak Cluster. It's a compelling project, partly obviously because lime and cement are two of the hardest industrial sectors to abate due to the emissions coming from the process. It's also going to be a large project, about 5 billion of capital investment to produce low carbon cement and lime. And it hits a lot of the touch points of government strategy in terms of growth, supporting industry, green industry, and potentially export markets and exporting cement, low carbon cement globally. Peak Cluster itself, it has 4 of the UK's leading cement and lime producers involved: Breedon, Holcim, Tarmac and Sigma Rock, working with Progressive Energy, and a target to take FID early 29, so this Parliament. I think Mark and Tiernan have mentioned something happened earlier this month, which is very exciting for the project, but I think for the industry as well, an investment by National Wealth Fund into the project. It was the first National Wealth Fund investment in the CCUS sector. Really important for us. It brought in nearly 30 million equity from NWF. Overall, it was part of a nearly 60 million equity raise. And that gives us the funding to take us to FID, so taking us through that important development phase. So it's interesting in that it is an equity investment, so it's different from many of the other ways that government have supported projects. It's not a grant, it's not a business model, so a contract. It is they're a shareholder. So NWF are now a shareholder in a joint venture between them, Summit Energy Evolution Limited, part of the Sumitomo Corporation, is working with Progressive Energy as a shareholder in Peak Cluster Limited, and the 4 Peak Cluster cement and lime producers. So you've got an interesting joint venture there with some really important, powerful parties who are very much needed and part of the project to make this happen. Might ask what are NWF getting out of this? So firstly, it's an equity investment, so they will be looking to see to get a return on that investment. But maybe more importantly, it's about bringing in private investment, building the market, stimulating large-scale investment across the value chain, and an investment at an early stage in development, which is great. And that financing is going to be used to develop to FID. So it's the consenting work, DCO, that is starting, and the FEED, front-end engineering and design, study work on the pipeline. So all of the parts that are needed in order to create a shovel-ready project for FID by early 29. And we're already getting going on that after the July investment, which is great. And longer term, obviously, it's about reducing the UK's reliance on imported cement and leading the way globally in the manufacture of low carbon cement. And maybe touching a bit on some of the themes that Mark mentioned. So I've talked about the story to date really on Peak Cluster and what it is. So what do we need going forward to make this compelling project happen? We need investment, so we'll need to take an investment decision, and we'll need funding for that, but we'll also need government support for that investment and for that funding. We've seen the great things that Mark's talked about from the comprehensive spending review and the industrial strategy and infrastructure strategy. So it's been really good to see the commitment from government being reiterated and the establishment of NISTA to coordinate delivery. I think the considerations from us, the things that we're thinking about most, and I think Mark mentioned we're not part of the track process, so we do need to have a route to getting an economic license and government support. But as Mark mentioned, there are other things that the government should be doing and are doing around creating the infrastructure to allow business to make money, not just from government support, but also from a strong carbon price. That is going to be a very helpful tool to potentially reduce the amount of government support that's needed to projects like this. CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, coming in 2027, very important, particularly for cement, where a lot of cement is imported at the moment. Crucial, really, to making this work. And low carbon industrial products. Again, the consultations come out recently on how that could work. And being able to show, demonstrate, and rely on a green premium for cement is another really important way of ensuring that the government support is kind of minimised and we can get the most from the industry and the market itself. Another thing I'll mention specifically that Peak Cluster is concerned about. So Peak Cluster is envisaged that the equity investment for Peak Cluster for the onshore pipeline is separate to the equity investment and ownership of the offshore pipeline and the store, which is different to the way things have been done for HyNet and East Coast. It mimics the way the gas industry is developed, where you've seen different ownership for onshore and offshore elements of gas pipeline, and I think it really plays to companies' strengths. So allowing companies to own parts of the infrastructure that they are best placed to manage and operate, and they have the skills around that. So we're looking to see an unbundling of those licenses so that we can have a separate ownership of the onshore pipeline. There is a government process or discussions around that. I'm expecting to see something come out in terms of a consultation maybe in the autumn that covers unbundling. And maybe lastly, what next after the track process? As Mark mentioned, we've observed and we've welcomed the pivot of the government from a strict cluster sequencing track process, where the emphasis is on projects competing against each other, which does, it helps in some ways, but it also means you sometimes lose the optimization of a project and the bigger picture. So we really welcome that pivot away from the track process towards a bigger picture optimization. We think it's the right thing to do, and it helps projects like ours that are about being cost effective as a full chain project. So thank you very much. That's my presentation on Peak Cluster, and I look forward to questions.
Catherine, thanks very much indeed for that. Really, really interesting to hear what's going on in the piece there. I'm sure that'll there'll be a few questions around what's next, and also I think the role of NWF and what precedent that sets as well. I think will be an interesting question to get into. Before we move on to questions, then we'll quickly hear from Jason, who I think also has some slides to share. So, Jason, when you're ready, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just share my screen. I assume you can see that. I'm not going to go presentation mode because I think that's going to cause me some problems. So good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to join this webinar, Shannon. And thanks to Mark and Catherine for their good oversight so far. What I'm trying to do here is to present a little bit on the technology side to demonstrate to everybody that carbon capture is indeed ready for the investment opportunities ahead in the UK. I myself am a commercial development manager within SLB Capturi. SLB Capturi is a relatively new name with an old and prestigious history. I'll flick through. And there we go. So we are bedded in the Aker ecosystem for a number of years, and around about July last year, Aker Carbon Capture was acquired into an 80-20 joint venture with oil services company SLB under their New Energies group. So we are the carbon capture technology provider of the SLB family now, which also means we have some interesting sister companies and partners. One of which is Carbon Storage Solutions under the newly created brand name Sequestri. So we are Capturi and they are Sequestri. We all like an I on the end of our name, which is quite nice. We are basically almost independent, but we have a number of touch bases between the two of us. So Sequestri have a lot of experience in subsurface and reservoir engineering and producing those good storage schemes. And you will have noticed recent news, the award on the East Coast Cluster project for them. And they've also been involved in the Northern Lights project in Norway, which I will touch on in a little bit. Now, at Capturi, from a long time back in the late 90s, from Aker Engineering and Technology through Aker Clean Carbon, Aker Solutions, then Aker Carbon Capture, and now SLB Capturi. We have over 20 years of experience and over 60,000 hours of operations through various largely mobile test campaigns and more recently large-scale projects coming into operation. We actually tested in the United Kingdom in 2012 on the now defunct and removed completely Longannet power station in Scotland. We had actually won one of those previous competitions to provide carbon capture, but of course the funding never came, and then, you know, around 2019 things started to pick up again, as explained by Mark earlier on. As part of our development history, we developed a test center at Mongstad, which has been used by pretty much everybody to test their variant solvent technologies to death and get a good operating background there. We had a number of solvent campaigns to develop solvent technologies in the kind of mid-2010s, which has led to a portfolio of solvents we offer today. And of course, through all this, we were developing carbon capture projects, most notably at the Brevik cement plant. We tested there in 2008 for just over a year with our mobile test unit, getting a lot of good data on how to capture CO2 from the onerous cement plants. But we talk a lot in the UK of first-of-a-kind projects. But in SLB Capturi, we do not see carbon capture projects as first of a kind, because we now have these projects up and running, notably at Twents and Brevik. Twents is a waste-to-energy plant in the Netherlands, captures 100,000 tonnes a year using a modular design concept that we have to keep the cost down and make things quite efficient. But that's a utilisation case, supplying CO2 to greenhouses. And then, of course, the poster child, of course, is the Brevik CCS plant, the first full-scale CCS plant on a cement facility in the world. A lot of people have done testing, but this unit is now up and running. It had its first 1,000 tonnes of CO2 a couple of months back. The CO2 has also now gone into shipped to the Northern Lights terminal, and the process is now pretty much fully operational. A couple of other notable projects listed on this slide: the Kalundborg CCS project, which is a number of modularized units in Denmark. There are 2 sites to this project. I won't even try to pronounce their names because my Danish isn't that good, but they both begin with A, either side of the Copenhagen Peninsula. One site has 2 Just Catch 100 units, and the other site has 3, with a rough total capacity of around about 500,000 tonnes a year, also feeding into Northern Lights. That project is currently in advanced stages of construction and hope to be coming into commissioning later on this year and early next year. Following that, we also have the Oslo CCS project, which is a kind of large-scale waste-to-energy project with a capacity of 400,000 tonnes. This is using a modularized system based on the process we used at Brevik. And we managed to reduce the cost significantly here by going to a modularized approach, which has brought that project back into, shall we say, competitive nature, such that they could secure the funding required to build the project. So that's just started EPC earlier on this year, should be up and running by around about 2029. Interesting aspects to both Kalundborg and Oslo CCS is the biogenic contents. Kalundborg is 100% biogenic and is selling CDRs to the likes of Microsoft and others. And Oslo CCS is now the first waste-to-energy plant to sell any sizable quantity of biogenic credits to help co-fund that project. So, you know, whereas in the UK we are still developing some of these models, in other countries we already see these business models being exploited to a certain degree. So very much not first of a kind from a technology perspective. Just a small kind of differentiator here between the modular ones and the non-modular. The modular we call Just Catch, the non-modular we call Big Catch. Big Catch operates under a license scheme. We don't build these anymore ourselves. We would partner with EPC contractors. Just Catch is modularized, and we deliver the modules to the site for integration into the client's plant. Quick word on Longship / Northern Lights. Northern Lights is the storage terminal. Longship is the overall project to integrate the capture facilities with that Northern Lights terminal. Longship being principally Norwegian, so even though the Ørsted biocarbon capture plant will feed into the Northern Lights terminal, it's not actually part of Longship, but both the Brevik and Celsio plants are. Here we have non-pipeline transportation in the form of ship transfer. There are 2 Northern Lights ships, both currently operating, taking CO2 from the cement plant to the Northern Lights terminal. Interesting aside is the Northern Lights terminal was built by our sister company, Aker Solutions, and some of the Northern Lights sequestration project was assisted with technology from SLB. So, you know, we sit along the full value chain here. And it's good to see that Northern Lights is moving on towards phase 2 now with more capacity coming up. Jumping along quickly because I fear we're running out of time. Quick picture here of what the Brevik facility looks like. A 400,000 tonne a year facility shoehorned into a very congested and very tricky brownfield site. Here, the cement plant was fully operational during the nearly 4-year construction and commissioning period. There was no requirement to shut the plant down for anything other than planned outages. There's a huge amount of heat recovery used on this site because cement plants have this challenge of not producing any effective steam or no steam system or waste heat. So as a result, we capture 400,000 tonnes a year, which is only about 50% of the total CO2 produced by the site, but it's the maximum amount we could do without using any additional energy. So we recover a lot of energy from the from waste heat recovery boilers around the plant. We have 3 separate waste heat recovery boilers in various systems. And then we also recover heat of compression into our carbon capture plant through a novel patented process, as determined here on the next slide. So we've got a patented heat integrated compression solution, which allows us, as I say, to recover that heat to reduce the SRD of the system. And here again, this slide clicks along to certain things. If we take an MEA reference plant, you would see a SRD of around 4.1 gigajoules per tonne. If we can use internal heat recovery, such as Brevik, we can get it down to under 2. And we also see some other schemes where we've got some kind of external waste heat recovery, perhaps through the use of heat pumps and such like, when we can indeed get that overall external energy down to less than 1 gigajoule per tonne, which is particularly important in areas such as the Peak District, where heat is not readily available. There's not a huge ability to import a lot of electricity, so heat recovery is of paramount importance for projects in those areas. I think really, since we've only got 10 minutes left, I think we probably stop the slides at that stage. I think I've said enough on technology and how that works. We're really excited to see these projects finally going in the UK, but we want to give everyone the opinion that technologically wise, we're ready. So don't worry about the technology, worry about the business models, is my message. Thank you.
Jason, thank you very much indeed. Just on that, I think a couple have asked if there's any chance of slides. So if it would be possible, I think they'd be greatly appreciated. I think brilliant. A very good segue into the questions there. You mentioned business models, and there is a question here immediately around that. The question's from Belinda Perryman. She asks, in terms of business models, does the panel think that the clarity on the bioenergy with CCS business model has come too late? Which megatons per year scale projects might still use it? So starting there immediately, does anyone have any thoughts on that? Does anyone want to
Yeah,
come in straight away?
happy to pick on that one. I mean, the Power BECCS business model is aimed at large scale biomass producers, of which there aren't a huge number in the UK, but those that there are very, very large, and people will know which ones are being referred to. Obviously, can't speak to individual businesses and where they're at in terms of where that Power BECCS business model is at. It has been delayed, but there has been positive discussions going on behind the scenes. And what we saw earlier this year was a commitment by government to the bridging mechanism that will help ensure that those sites are able to operate in between when their current power support mechanisms come to an end, and then move on to a CCS business model once it is finalised. So yes, the delay is causing problems, but I don't think I would say it's at a point where it's come too late. I think if those discussions are ongoing, I think if government can get it in place, then the projects that are ready to take them up, of which there maybe are 2 or 3 within the country, will be able to move fairly quickly in order to take advantage of those. And they've been provided that little bit more support with that transition mechanism in place as well.
Thank you, Mark. Does anyone else want to come in on that? Or are we okay to move on?
I could say that the majority of the major producers there are not necessarily conveniently closely linked to the clusters at this current stage. So there's a bit of TNS work to do for certainly 2 of the major ones there, which probably hasn't helped them get to the front of the queue.
Jason, you have an uncanny ability of leading us into the next questions, because this next question actually relates to TNS. So well done. Another question here then. Does the panel think that the ENI TNS final investment decision demonstrated that the UK has moved away from having everything lined up in every CCUS project to building UK stores, and the CO2 will come and fill them up? Any questions on that shift in approach? Sorry, any thoughts on that shift in approach? Catherine?
Comment. Yeah, I'm happy to comment on that. So first of all, I thought that decision was a really important decision, because it is so hard to line up large, complex investment decisions being made by different organisations in different parts of the value chain. And it was such an important decision, really great decision that the government made to go ahead with that. But I think whether it signals a change in their approach, I think they did that because they got enough confidence to say, let's go ahead anyway. I think that they will always want to try and line up stores with emitters. Who wouldn't? That there is this risk of stranded assets. So I don't know if it really signals a complete change in approach. I don't think so. I think they are always going to be looking for kind of full chain assurance and making sure that they are designing stores that have emitters and emitters that have stores. So yeah, that's my view.
Yeah, just to add to that, completely agree with Catherine there. Those decisions wouldn't have been made unless government were fairly certain around the status of the emitters that sit around them as well. And we know there's lots of discussions going on. So yeah, as Catherine said, I'm not sure it's a move away from having everything lined up, but it was still an important decision that they pushed forward with the TNS funding, the FIDs, and we're still awaiting to see how they line up the emitters behind them as well.
I mean, I would echo that. I'd just say, I mean, compared to Europe, I think this is somewhere where the UK is ahead. We are investing in these clusters, and a build it and they will come approach to a certain degree. Of course, a lot of good work by Progressive Energy in developing that cluster and making sure that the emitters are lined up, and certainly with the East Coast cluster as well. I mean, very important part. But in Europe, I think you still see some of this linkage questions being added, and I think that maybe explains why perhaps Northern Lights has gone so far, because you can basically ship from anywhere to Norway, and you can get your project going. Whereas, a bit of the pipeline stuff is still yet to be really fully realised in Europe. And so, somewhere where the UK has said, we can pat ourselves on the back there.
Thanks, Jason. And yeah, Catherine, I think it's really interesting to see all those cement manufacturers there from the start around, at this feed stage, investing from the very start alongside NWF. It does seem like a very a very positive development and approach as well. And interesting to hear that equity approach as well. A little bit novel, I think. It's certainly good to see. Okay, another question here from Marta Oliveira. Marta asks, is there any government support for biogenic carbon capture projects selling CO2 to utilization market, for example, food and beverage, as there is currently a price gap, for example, DevEx funding? Understanding the situation is not covered by the engineered GGR model and therefore does not cover the price difference. Any thoughts on that then? Support for biogenic carbon capture projects?
Yeah, happy to pick up on that. So yeah, you're right. The current GGR model wouldn't necessarily be suitable for usage. I think that's reflective of how the CCUS market has evolved in the UK so far. We've been very focused on getting the cluster sequencing done and delivered, and getting the transport and storage networks to initial stores. And the government's been very focused on long-term geological storage as a result. There is discussions going on within government to relook at utilisation and see how we push those markets forward. It's something that the CCSA have had discussions with government about. And we have done a position paper in the last year, which we've been picking up with government as well. It would require it's likely the GGR model would need some tinkering with and adaptation in order to make it work for that. And most importantly, you'd also have to have the non-pipeline transport market operational as well. So yes, there isn't anything currently in place in the same way that we have business models. It is something that's being discussed, and we want to see push forward. It is a market that could evolve quite quickly if it is enabled. And actually, what we're interested in there is if the prices for the usage markets are strong enough, how much support is the support really just needed around the NPT side, the non-pipeline transport side of it, as well. So an evolving market. It is in discussion, but not quite there yet.
Can I jump in? I would say that the food and beverage market is probably quite small in the UK. It doesn't really justify the order of magnitude costs you get for developing, carbon capture facilities at that scale. I mean, there are a number of very small scale providers. We're talking thousands of tons a year rather than hundreds of thousands of tons a year. So there's kind of slightly constrained by cost to that level. I think the SAF market is quite an interesting one. And that is, effectively a utilization. But the benefit of the SAF market, it will require largely biogenic CO2. So if you've got a biogenic CO2 stream, you can work with SAF, but then again, you still have the value chain link up to get there. So you have a SAF producer needing biogenic CO2, but they need a certain availability or guarantee of security of supply there. So maybe they need, two suppliers of biogenic CO2, and then you need the transport system, non-pipeline, largely to get there, because if you have two suppliers, you won't have them on the same site. So yeah, there's some complexities there to be bottomed out, but certainly I see it for SAF perhaps more in the medium term, but maybe food and beverage is probably, you could just take a slipstream off any of the other plants and sell those quantities if there is a financial market for them.
Thanks, Jason. I'm a bit conscious of time. I wonder if we can just extend just a little bit, if our speakers are able to stay on this. Just a few things I think would be good to cover. We got a question here from Bob McDonald. Bob says, excellent presentations, all very positive take on the CCS markets. However, having been involved in CCS since the early days of Gorgon in Australia, there are still challenges to be addressed. Brackets commercial/technical, especially when considering hubs commingling CO2 rather than single CO2 sources. So Bob's question is, does the panel feel that there is enough joint-up approach to addressing the commercial and technological challenges that would really help accelerate CCUS uh, markets? Um, I think that plays on. I think Nizo mentioned this as well, that there's a kind of a complex picture of CCS developments and operation, and no real formal planning for the development of these networks. Is that something that the panel thinks needs to be addressed? And just as a side note on that as well, is there a need for more strategic planning approach alongside, electricity, gas, and hydrogen as well, to ensure alignment across the whole energy system too? Is that a consideration that the panel feels is important, or needs more thought as well? So a couple of questions there around a joined up approach to addressing the commercial and technological challenges, and then that whole systems approach as well. Any thoughts?
I'll maybe take a bit of the question. On the commercial side, there have been a lot of challenges in developing the government business models. But I'm going to give Mark a bit of a plug here and say, actually, I mean, it's organisations like the CCSA that allows collaboration that I think have really helped. That there has been a really good discussion across the industry about what are the key issues on the commercial side with the business models, that has allowed the CCSA also on Hydrogen UK to input directly to government and have a proper discussion with government about it. So I think that's worked quite well. On the technical side, maybe I'll let others comment a bit more. I mean, I know there's been issues around the development of the network code. That hasn't been without its a bumpy ride, and is still having a little bit of a bumpy ride on some things. But that's my thoughts.
Thanks, Catherine. Anyone else want to come in there?
Just to add, no one's pretending that this isn't complicated and it hasn't been going on a long time. Yes, there are issues still to be resolved, but we are now far and away far more advanced than we've ever been before. So, as mentioned, we have the two FID projects. We have a number of emitters being developed. There's huge amounts of innovation going on within the technology, which also Jason spoke to very well. We have a lot of the regulatory systems in place. They might not be perfect yet, and there is a lot of evolving to be done. Catherine mentioned the network codes. That is going to be an iterative process, and there's a lot to be done there, like unbundling, like Catherine mentioned as well. So there's lots of questions to be answered, but the positive thing is that there's lots of existing work streams actively going on within government that industry, the CCSA, are directly involved in and directly having those discussions. So I am confident that as this industry gets underway, that these are issues that we can resolve, as is the nature of any nascent industry, in terms of establishing itself, drawing out those issues, and they get resolved by doing, they get resolved by deployment, and that is a long lesson that the UK has really learned. We have designed everything to the nth degree, and we've been delivering this full value chain, which I think puts us in a very strong position. But now to really address those problems, we need to get building.
So I can just follow up with the technical aspect.
Sure.
Yeah, one thing we do see is slight differences in the specification of CO2 for injection, and homogeneity there would certainly benefit everybody. I think we're getting towards that. I mean, there's still some question marks on what some of these impurities do in CO2, and there's a lot of good research being done in both the academic and the business community to try and work out what those are. I think if we get aligned with the EU, they're going to have to push that a bit more alignment there to try and get this kind of cross-border CO2 specs aligned. So that would certainly help out. I mean, but of course, yes, it is a very good question that Bob asked, because if you're putting the CO2 into a ship and it's come from somewhere else and it's got someone else off-spec CO2 in it, you've got a bit of concern. So you do need to look into these things when you're developing these projects, especially if they're multimodal, involving a number of different transportation systems, which could supply more than one emission project. So, yeah. just one important element from the technical perspective.
Thanks, Jason. Well received. I suppose just a final question from me before we finish. Then it's kind of a more rounded question, and it's I think it sounds a bit doomsday, but it's I suppose it can be taken as a call to arms. But I read a recent report that mentioned that CCS policy, and you mentioned this, Mark, has had a bit of a turbulent history with the late stage cancellation of two major funding competitions, and that's certainly damaged investor confidence. And this recent report indicated this Parliament may well be the UK's last chance to establish itself as a competitive player in this area. I suppose I'd ask, would the panel agree with that, or is that quite pessimistic? And I suppose, what does the panel think needs to happen now to really capitalize on this movement that we've got now in terms of funding support and kind of, I suppose, confidence in the industry? It's all very positive. How do we make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes that we've already made and really capitalize on this and make progress? Is there any kind of closing thoughts on that the panel has? I suppose, Mark, if we start with you and we go in order, any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the first thing to state is recognizing we're far in advance of anything that we've managed previously. So having two projects at FID is a real milestone, and seeing them in being delivered, and a further 3 projects now working towards FID by the end of this Parliament. So that's really, really positive. In order to capitalize on this, one, the industry needs to deliver, so that's really important, and have those messages out there. That needs to be represented as real benefits for the UK in terms of jobs, investment, and seeing how that builds out. But then we also need to be developing those other markets, our GGR markets, our cross-border markets, our low-carbon markets, which all leads this to being a self-sustaining sector, and really establishes it as its own sector, doing that. So that's what we're moving towards now. Recognise we've come an awful long way. We're in a really good place, and pushing forward with a positive market in the future.
And I think that move from sequencing to portfolio is I suppose a really welcome step in itself, and a vote of confidence. So that's good to see. Catherine, as someone at the forefront of this at the moment, especially with progressive energy across a number of these projects, any thoughts on that?
I think I don't have much to add to what Mark said, in that, I mean, we just need to get on and deliver. And I think anyone involved in these projects in industry take it very personally. We need to get on and day by day get these things to investment decisions and get them delivered. And yeah, for government, it's about less process and sequencing and more cost effectiveness in the round, and delivering the business models that support the projects. And I think we've done amazing things over the last particularly kind of 5 years, and I really hope and trust that sense will prevail and will continue on that track in the UK.
Thanks, Catherine. And then finally, Jason, from the technological side, and I suppose as part of a country doing this already elsewhere, any final thoughts?
I think the most important thing for me is those projects that get funding and go ahead have to be successful. The worst thing that can happen now is we have all this momentum, and then we suffer an HS2, a Hinkley Point, something like this, where costs just spiral out of control. So I think it's incumbent on government to not necessarily squeeze the purse strings so much that they constrain what might happen at the other side, but it's very important to get these first projects delivered and working with minimum fuss, minimum publicity, minimum bad publicity, and then once it's been proven it can work, people get more comfortable, and we just end up rolling on through to 2035 and 2040 for those really ambitious targets that everyone else has issued already.
Jason, thank you very much. I think that's a good place to close then. Thanks very much for staying with us, the three of you, and also people in the audience. I think it's good to get through those last points. Just to mention there, Belinda mentioned a note from yesterday's CCSA cross-border meeting, if she may. The view was on compatibility, not conformity. I think that was mentioning one of the points raised earlier. Just thought I'd mention that. But yep, thank you very much. As I said, I think that's a good place to close. really good discussion, and I think we're seeing a real point of progress now, and lots to be really hopeful about in the industry. So thank you very much, everyone, for sharing your thoughts. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago at our first webinar, this webinar series is part of a lead in looking at a bit more detail into topics that are going to be covered at the Foresight event, which is taking place next February. It's an all energy clean technology show. It's merging a lot of our Foresight brands. One being Net Zero Live, which is all about industrial manufacturing, decarbonisation, and see the crucial role that CCS plays in that. So if this was of interest, please do feel free to check out the Foresight event taking place next February. It's going to be a 2-day event on the 4th and 5th, looking at all of these sectors in the round and looking at some of those shared challenges that they all face. Our next webinar is going to be in a couple of weeks. It's looking at a much more nascent sector of natural hydrogen exploration and market potential, especially given recent developments and reports from the Royal Society and BGS as well. After that, we'll be looking at data center energy requirements as well. So two hot topics at the minute. If they're of interest, please do feel free to check them out. They're completely free, and these sessions are meant to just be a sort of information gathering session, looking in a bit more detail and granularity at some of these really key topics. So once again, thank you very much to all of our speakers. Thanks for joining us in the audience. We will be sending a recording and slides subject to permissions, and also a transcript post-event. So do look out for that. And with that, I'll sign off and say thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your week and weekend when it comes, and we look forward to seeing you again, hopefully in the future. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.